Привіт, I'm Chuck Olinik. I'm a Ukrainian-American, and I was baptized with the name Yaroslav, which also happens to be the name that I use in the historical reenactment group, the Society for Creative Anachronism. And some time ago, I stumbled across a stack of notebooks that I had assembled over the years of Slavic research and research on Slavic folklore. And I decided to start a series called Tales of the Borderland. Sometimes I mess up because I was still getting the title straight in my head, so sometimes I refer to it as Tales from the Borderland. It'll even out. And I thought this would be easy. I know where to start. I'll start with the god Perun the Thunderer, who's the chief god of the pantheon, except I couldn't really get there because I had to explain a few earlier gods. And then I started thinking, as I started working on the Perun video, that with the war in Ukraine going on for close to 11 months now, people a year ago probably couldn't have even found Ukraine on the map. Now they're noticing it. Well, I decided this is going to kind of serve a double purpose. Not just to help explain the folklore, because I'm that annoying kind of person that always includes a lot of backstory when I talk, and also when I used to teach. But it also might help out with people who are becoming aware of Ukraine and the idea that the name of the place is not Kiev, it's Kyiv. And this will kind of give you a dose of not just Kyivan Rus history, but Ukrainian history as well. So we'll get through some of the history stuff, and then we'll eventually get to talking about some of the gods. So before I get into talking about the pagan god of the Slavs, Perun the Thunderer, I got to talk about, I got to give you some historical context and some sources that we're going to be using. The Tale of Bygone Years, also known in English as the Rus Primary Chronicle, also known as the Primary Chronicle. It's an old East Slavic chronicle of Kyivan Rus from about 850 to about 1110. The work's name originates from the opening sentence of the text, which reads, "These are the narratives of bygone years regarding the origin of the land of Rus, the first princes of Kyiv, and from what source the land of Rus had its beginning." It's pretty much considered the fundamental work on interpreting the history of the East Slavs. So the historical period that's covered by this Tale of Bygone Years, there's an introductory part that covers biblical times, and it finishes up with the year 1117 in the Chronicle's third edition. The Chronicle has it that in the year 6360, that's 852 in the Common Era or Common Reckoning, the 15th of the indiction at the accession of Emperor Michael, the land of Rus was first named. Okay, there's a little mistake here because Michael III doesn't end up becoming emperor until 842, so a decade earlier. But this kind of gives you a feel for how the years are reckoned. Also, there is a monk named Nestor, who basically gets the credit for writing a lot of this stuff, so sometimes it's referred to as Nestor's Chronicle. And since he is working at the court of Sviatopolk, who is very pro-Scandinavian, there's an undercurrent It's not even an undercurrent. He's just straight out rah-rah, Scandinavians are cool. And he's basically saying that the Rurikid dynasty is the legitimate dynasty to rule Kyiv and the land of the Rus, and that all the princes that are fighting with each other should just stop and accept it. When you get into the early part of the chronicle, you get a lot of anecdotal stuff like the arrival of the three Varangian brothers and the founding of Kyiv and the murder of Oskold and Dir around 882, the death of Oleg, all right, if you're, being American, in 912, and that was supposed to have been foreseen by him. Vengeance that was completely thorough, taken by Olga, all right, the wife of Igor, all right, upon the people who murdered her husband, and her actions pretty much secured her right to rule as regent until her young son came of age. And then you get Nestor's stuff explaining how Volodymyr the Great, who ruled from like 980 to 1015, became a Christian and suppressed the worship of Perun and the other traditional gods of Kyiv. We really are getting to those gods. All right, we're just kind of taking a circular route. Okay, now we kind of get into the social structure of Kyiv. Okay, so you have the rulers and the ruled. And the Grand Prince of Kyiv, Veliki Knyaz, and his offspring they're originally of Scandinavian origin, but by the late 10th century, they're intermarried with the local Slavic elites, they're intermarried with Byzantines, with Olovtsian royal families, so they're pretty much assimilated, and the number of princes is going to increase because the realm's going to start getting divided up more and more by the Veliki Knyaz, the Grand Prince. By the way, that title doesn't really come into use until Volodymyr's son Yaroslav the Wise starts using it in like 1036. Okay, below the princes, you have two groups, the Druzhina and the Boyars. The Druzhina, a lot of them are Scandinavian imports. They are part of the retinue who share his fire, and even they're like divided up between those guys who actually get to be in the presence of the prince, like really close, and they share his personal fire, and then those who aren't as close. And that other group, the Boyars, those are the Slavic elites. And by the second half of the 11th century, they just kind of merged together. Okay, there's a third group in the higher strata, and those are the church folks. And that's going to be kind of past what we want to cover. Also, there's wealthy merchants, the hosti. Okay, now we get to the ruled. And so we got to take a look at the towns first. And most of the townspeople are either owners of artisanal enterprises, жителі, or well-to-do people, or they're the workers and artisans that actually do the work. They're called молодші люди, or younger people, which I think is kind of interesting. Maybe you have to kind of work your way up. And in the countryside, the peasants. They could be either smerdi, free persons. By the way, smerdi has an implication of stinking, so kind of do the math. Or these kupi, and those are half free. And those, the smerdi, they either own their land or they're living on the prince's land. And either way, if you're in either of those groups, you're paying taxes. If you're living on the prince's land, you have to also provide the prince with horses, and you also have to provide the prince with men to fight. The Zakupi, they're peasants that were temporarily deprived of their freedom, so it might have been because of debt. Okay, at the bottom are the holopi or slaves. And you already can kind of figure out their rights. Okay, and then there's a couple of statuses that are sort of catch-alls, because if you have like a regimented society, some people don't fit in the regular categories, and those would be like the Izgoi. These could be princes that don't have territory, or sons of priests who can neither read or write. Maybe they're the dumb ones. You have merchants that went bankrupt. You have slaves that bought their freedom. They somehow don't fit into those other categories, and a lot of times they would end up living on church lands. And we'll kind of get to them later on because they'll fit in here eventually. We'll find a place for them. And then there's the Chernikobuki, the Black Hats. These are remnants of Steppes military elites, and they end up getting merged together, and there's a phrase that was used for them, which was to describe them as Svoyazichniki, or our pagans, kind of like they're the pet pagans. And they were often a part of the prince's military forces. All right, so there's some background for Kyivan Rus, and it'll give us a basis to work with when we're looking at the Slavic mythology and folklore. I hope you stick with me for Tales of the Borderland number 4. That one will actually be about Perun. I hope you stick with me on my journey.